Hello, everyone, and welcome to a dual recorded episode between America Offline and Ships. This is David Klein here calling in with Pat McAndrew. Pat, what's going on, my man?
Hey, very excited to be here. I'm very excited to do this dual episode. Like we were just talking before, at least I haven't done this yet. So I'm excited to see what happens with this dual podcast episode. It's exciting.
Definitely. So, for all the listeners out there, Pat and I are doing some work together behind the scenes, which will be in front of the scenes soon. And we decided to get on a podcast call today and just record and just talk and have a free flowing, unstructured, real conversation about life and all things digital wellness. So, this is totally unscripted, unplugged, and we're just going to jump on in. What do you think, Pat?
Oh, I am excited. This is right up my alley, David, because I think that conversations like this are super important nowadays. I think that with the advancement of technology, I think technology is becoming more and more enticing and more attractive. And there are a billion reasons now to be on our phones because so much is happening on our phones. And so a lot of times it becomes difficult for people to compete with that. And so I'm a big believer that it's conversations like this that are really, truly important and only going to become more important as time goes on.
Totally, and they're increasingly rare as technology is so integral to our lives. We often are talking on Facebook Messenger and text threads and social media, and it's really difficult to find those moments where we can just really do a deep dive and have like a deep, meaningful conversation. So this is going to be really fun.
Yeah, I'm excited, and like you said before, it's exciting the behind the scenes work that we're doing, and what you've built with America Offline. There's some really exciting stuff down the line, and it'll be exciting to share it with people and to share it with our listeners as well.
Totally. So, Pat, I want to let my listeners know, and in many ways, maybe some of your listeners needed a little bit of an update as to like in some background on like who Pat McAndrew is. I think you've got a super unique story, and I don't know if there's any other digital wellness folks that are quite like you. So, I'd love for you to give us like your 2-3 minute elevator pitch or story about who you are and what's brought you to today and why you got interested in the whole digital wellness field.
Oh man, yeah, that's a definitely an interesting story. Well, and why I love connecting with people like you is that with digital wellness, so many people are entering this field in a wide variety of different ways. And so, yeah, like you said, my way is a little unique. I have a background as an actor and performer, and while I was training as an actor and a wide variety of classes that I took, there were exercises that we were doing, and I remember thinking in this one class we were doing this. It was like an imaginative exercise where we had to think about a place that we were at and imagine being there. And there were a wide variety of exercises that we would do too. And I remember thinking in that moment, oh my gosh, everybody would benefit from these skill sets. We were learning things such as effective communication, active listening, how to focus, how to be present, how to be self-aware and as well as aware of your surroundings. But at the time, I wasn't quite sure how to go about educating people on these skill sets. There's a field called applied theater. And what applied theater is using these sort of skills that I was just discussing and applying them to different industries. A lot of people who work in the applied theater field will often teach these skill sets to corporations as a means of team building, will teach improv to a variety of organizations as well as a means to enhance team collaboration. And so I knew that these were things that existed. And very much like a lot of people who entered the digital wellness space, I began observing my surroundings and started to see more and more that people were really intoxicated by their phones. They were on them all the time. And I would have conversations with people, even close friends, and I would be in the middle of telling a story, and the conversation would just fall flat there. And, my friend would say like, yeah, but I could tell that they weren't there. I could tell that they weren't fully listening.
Right.
And I picked up Sherry Turkle's book, Reclaiming Conversation, The Power of Talk in a Digital Age. And this was really my first step into the digital wellness field. I was very inspired by the book and ended up creating a one-man show that is titled Reel, Reel. And this show is all about the importance of, or rather the influence that technology has on human relationships. And I really experimented with that between myself as a performer and the performer's relationship to the audience. And throughout the show, I introduce more and more technology as it goes along. And yeah, it's really just supposed to serve as this experience that the audience goes through of having this close friendship relationship with this performer, and then it just being completely disintegrated by the end of the show. And so I created this show. I then moved to New York. I lived just outside of Philadelphia initially. Did the show in New York City. It went really well. And while I was developing this show, I also created a blog. At the time, it's called the Low Tech Trek, and it was a complement to the show in a lot of ways. And I would, on that blog, talk about my research and talk about my ideas behind how technology is influencing us. And once the show was over, there was still a lot of conversation going on about this. And at that time, and I'm sure you might have felt the same way when you started your work as well, is I felt like I was the only one talking about these things. I slowly discovered that there was a community. I started to get to know about the Digital Wellness Collective, the Center for Humane Technology, who are all talking about how technology can better serve people. From writing about these things, I started coaching individuals, primarily career professionals, on how to effectively communicate, how to listen better in the workplace. I had the opportunity to speak at some events. And really, a lot of this grew from starting to network with fellow people working in this space. And right now, I was just mentioning before we started recording that right now I'm at a point in my career where I'm in a lot of ways trying to go back to my roots, trying to figure out ways in which I can use my acting and theater background, to use the arts, to use media as a way to talk about these issues, to really wake people up in a lot of ways, and to, or at least get them thinking about these topics, about digital wellness, about their relationship with technology, and how that relationship with technology impacts their relationship to themselves and the relationship to others. So starting my podcast, Ships, the Vessels for a Meaningful Life, is very much in line with that, where I'm talking about really, as technology is continuing to advance, the importance of connecting as humans, the importance of building genuine and meaningful relationships. So that brings us to today, and I'm very excited to see where this field goes within the next 10 years, now that we're at the start of a new decade.
Totally. Awesome. Well, Pat, thank you so much for that really interesting background that you have.
Yeah.
It's fascinating. Yeah.
I would love for my fellow listeners to hear more about yourself as well. And how did you get into this space, and what are you up to today?
Yeah, for sure. I appreciate it. I'm going to try and keep it. I don't like talking about myself too much, and I could get going a little long. So I'm going to try and keep it as short as possible and sweet for the listeners out there. But so my background, like yours, was in acting. Mine was actually in sports, particularly baseball. And I run a nonprofit baseball organization in the San Francisco Bay Area for a good 10 years. And 2-3 years ago, I took over the head varsity position at my alma mater, my high school, and started coaching teens. I primarily coached college before that. And immediately upon starting to coach the teens in the San Francisco Bay Area at the high school that I graduated from, I noticed upon my first days there that, first off, my seniors and my juniors, they weren't getting their licenses. And I was like, whoa, that is quite strange. Why are their mom and dad why are their moms and dads picking them up? And I noticed that things were a little different as I started to lean in a little bit more. Primarily, they weren't hanging out like I used to hang out as a kid. There was a lack of enthusiasm and support for one another. There was a lack of just general connection amongst teammates. Not going and grabbing burgers after the games. It was mainly kids showing up and pretty stressed out and not a lot of conversation. They would show up early to practice or to the game, and they would just kind of plop on the bench and they'd be on their phones. And it was the first thing also that they would do right after games and practices was check their devices. And I didn't really understand as to why this was all happening, why my teens were so quiet, why they weren't unable to, why they were unable to introduce themselves to me when I walked in the dugout, or say, hey coach, what's up? And or address me and come up and say, hey coach, like what's going on? How can I improve my hitting swing or my mechanics? And so after 2 seasons, I did 44 one-on-ones with every single player and their parents, and
Wow.
found that, and I leaned into their habits and learned that on the most part, each kid was spending about 6 to 10 hours per day in front of a device. And it made me just start thinking, maybe this is why my kids are not connected, why they seem to be very, if for lack of a better term, very blah. They're just like kind of quiet. And I'm not saying everyone needs to be like this alpha, but like there was just no leadership and no connection and no fire, enthusiasm to compete and work together and grind towards a common goal. So I started to talk about this as I went around to different conferences, and learned that many youth sports coaches were starting to see the same things. Coaching just wasn't as fun because the kids weren't as receptive. They weren't as engaged with each other, with the information, with the game itself as they used to be. They were much more interested in seemingly other things. And so this was last summer, and I went out, and so I started to pick up books and reading about this and learning about what was going on with mental health in America, the rapidly rising rates of anxiety, depression, and suicide. And I began to get very concerned. But I'll tell you, Pat, the big turning point for me was when I was out in Detroit, and I was with a family friend out to lunch. And I said, hey, Paige, this was a senior. She was a female, a senior in high school at the time, and said, hey, Paige, like, hey, how's it going? Like, you enjoying your senior year? She goes, and this is word for word. She says, I don't like my senior year. Everybody is stressed out. I literally don't have one friend who isn't on anti-anxiety medication. That was like word for word. I was like,
Wow.
whoa, that's really moving in not a good way. And the next day I had lunch with another family friend. Her name's Jordan. She's now in college, but she was a junior in high school, and they went to different high schools, but same town. And I said, Jordan, Paige told me that everyone out here is like really stressed out. Like, what's going on? She's like, David, it's really bad. I've had 2 friends this year that have already committed suicide. And I recently saved another friend who ingested a ton of Advil and tried to kill herself. It's really bad. And I was like, whoa. And that was the moment where I was like, okay, planting my flag in the sand. Enough is enough. The same types of things that my 2 family friends were likely seeing in their friends, I'm seeing those type of symptoms show up in my teens right here in the San Francisco Bay Area. I'm young enough to know a world without technology, I'm old enough to know a world without technology, but young enough to really kind of understand teens and understand technology. And at that point, I decided that I was going to dedicate the next chapter of my life to helping primarily teens develop intentional tech usage habits and really develop some self-awareness about how to develop a healthy relationship with technology, how to develop healthy relationships with themselves and with others and the world around them. And spent the entire fall working, doing focus groups, community discussions, offline events, and retreats to learn about how to create curriculum and environments to teach kids and teens and families how to take their life back and how to incorporate technology into their life in a way that is meaningful and that improves their quality of life instead of taking them away from the present moment. So that is sort of my story. And now we're doing offline retreats for primarily teens, but we're also looking to do some events for millennials and adults and in corporate corporate solutions and environments, corporate wellness programs. And we're really excited about this whole field and helping people get some understanding and knowledge about what is going on out there in the world of digital overuse and digital wellness. So that is my that is my long story in a nutshell, I guess you could
Oh,
say.
that's a great story. I
Yeah.
think what you hit upon, it's the rates in anxiety and depression are through the roof, and apparently they just keep raising every single year. And I think that a lot of the research is, I guess, not pointing primarily to the smartphones and to social media, but that is certainly a factor
Yeah.
in all these issues that are starting to happen, or that are rather, they've always been happening but are now expedited and happening much more frequently on a larger basis. And I look at kids today, and really I'm not that much older than them, and I can't imagine being in high school with a smartphone and having to keep up with the wide variety of apps and the way that the kids communicate. I I can't imagine how tough it must be.
When I think about the teens of nowadays, first of all, for any parents of teens out there, or any teens there that happen to be listening, I want to say that the teens of today, before I say anything more, are amazing. They're like little activists. They're super self-aware and very informed, primarily because of technology. And so it's not such a bad thing. I think the teens of today are amazing. And you know what? From the experience that I've had connecting with teens, Pat, is that they're actually very aware of their technology over usage habits. They're aware of it. They just don't really know what to do about it. Even if they're trying to get offline, all of their friends are online all the time, so they'd be abandoning their friends. So it's a really tough thing. But the one demographic that I really am concerned about and worried about is young teen girls. I can't imagine being a 12, 13, 14-year-old female, young girl growing up in the world of Instagram nowadays. And it's not a surprise. Well, it is a surprise, and it's quite shocking that the suicide rate for girls between the ages of 12 to 14 since 2007 to from 2007 to 2015, 12 to 14-year-old girls, the suicide rate has tripled
Oh my
during that time.
gosh.
And in 2007 was the year that the iPhone came out. 2012 was the year that 50% of Americans had an iPhone in their pockets. And I just cannot imagine what it would be like to be a 13-year-old girl nowadays. And the funny thing is, Pat, Facebook and Instagram, they literally say in the fine print, do not, they say this is not for kids younger than 13, yet the majority of girls younger than 13 actually have social media. So if we just paid attention to what the guidelines that Facebook and Instagram put out there, then we'd be in a much better way. But we're not even doing that. So we're seeing why a lot of these problems are starting to surface.
Yeah, this is always a question that I bring up to myself as well as to others, with regards to how much of the responsibility is on the big tech companies, and then how much of the responsibility is our own personal responsibility, or rather the responsibility of the family of the teens.
Totally.
I don't know if there's an answer. If there is, it's certainly hard to pinpoint it. I mean, I come from really the perspective of really exercising your own personal responsibility, but when you're 11, 12, 13 years old, at least I know myself, like there's not really a strong concept of that.
Ugh,
and
yeah.
and I can only imagine, as parents, it's incredibly difficult to enforce certain things or certain rules that are effective.
Totally. I mean, I think ultimately, Pat, It's both, you know, a tech problem, but also it's sort of like an us problem too. It's a little bit of both. And these tech companies, they're preying on, you know, our most basic human desires. You know, the bottom part of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, like our desire to be accepted, our desire to fit in, to be recognized, and they know this. Ultimately, we're not going to start to see legitimate change in the field and the climate of digital addiction and overuse, in my opinion, Pat, until we get parents, coaches, teachers, governments, tech companies, nonprofits, everybody on board with this. We can do as much work as we possibly can on our end, but ultimately, I don't think things are going to start to change until the government and tech companies start to get involved. I like to think about it a little bit, kind of like cigarettes, to be honest. People started smoking cigarettes back in the day, and it never used to be an issue. And then once the government, and then things started to come out, oh, people are dying because of cigarettes, and then the government started to regulate cigarette usage in public spaces, and that was the moment that things started to change. And I think at the moment that the government starts to regulate tech companies, I think that's when we're really going to start to see legitimate change. But in the meantime, the efforts that you and I are doing, working with schools, working with individuals, working with families, I feel like that's almost all we can do. And I'll leave it to Tristan Harris and the Center for Humane Tech and Common Sense Media and these folks to fight the battle, you know, with the policymakers and things like that, because it's certainly necessary.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I really agree with you comparing it to smoking cigarettes, because even back in the day, very much like today, there would be kids and teens who would see their parents smoke and then think there's no issue with it. And I think there are a lot of parents out there that maybe are not realizing the effect that, I mean, they might be witnessing the effect that tech is having on their kids, but I think they're also having their own struggles with their relationship with technology as well. And then the kids see that and then mimic that behavior. And
Totally.
so I'm curious how, while yes, we reach the kids through the parents, through the teachers, it's like, how do we reach the parents and teachers if they're very attached to their devices as well? It's a big, it's a big question.
It's tough, Pat. Like this isn't just about teens. This is or kids. This is everyone. Everyone struggles with this. In fact, it's actually the adults. If you consider the computer a device, which I do, adults are spending more time in front of screens than even kids. In fact, the average adult is spending more time in front of a screen than they are sleeping. So they need the education too. So all the programs out there, all the folks in the Digital Wellness Collective that are educating parents, it's certainly necessary. But I also think that for some reason, there's a lack of programming that is directly teaching parents to directly teach their kids, or teaching teachers how to teach their kids, and giving them not just the education, but actually giving them a handbook, if you will, or a playbook, or legitimate, actionable, practical tools that they can implement into their lives to take back their attention. So I think at the moment that as this field starts to unfold, I think it's going to really require us working with parents, working with teachers and coaches and educators to give them tools, not just so that they can manage their own lives, but that they can teach their kids about it too. Ultimately, we're not going to create that much change for the future generations if we can't change it ourselves. But I think people are starting to get better at this, and we're starting to figure out how to have these conversations and how to teach teachers and coaches and parents in a way that actually works, so that they can empower their kids with the right information, so that they could begin to implement actual change.
Yes, I absolutely agree with that. And I think that's been the biggest question to figure out, is figuring out how to reach these parents, these teachers, really the public in general, how to reach them in a way that will at least spread awareness and at least get them starting to think about, okay, what is my relationship with technology like? How is it affecting my brain? And figuring out a way to reach them so that they're going to listen and want to implement change in their lives. Because I think, at least from my perspective, in working in this space so far, like kind of like what you were talking about with the kids before, like people are aware how much time they're spending on technology. They know that, okay, yeah, it's probably not healthy, but they don't really know what to do about it. And I guess that's what I'm trying to figure out in my career is, okay, how can I reach those people in a way that is going to awaken their senses and want to have an experience that is outside of the digital world, because there's so much in the digital world that is attractive and enticing and wanting to reel us in.
Right.
And how can we create something that is going to encourage them to step outside of that? And so that's why I really believe in what you're doing with creating these offline experiences and allowing people to connect to one another in real time and to share experiences and to share memories together that they will then have for the rest of their lives. We're not going to remember scrolling through Instagram for an hour every day, but
Hmm.
we might remember that hour-long campfire at that retreat that we went to 10, 20 years ago, looking,
Right.
looking from the future back to the past. And so I think there is so much value in offline experiences and figuring out a way to really reach these people in a way that's going to resonate with them.
Totally. Pat, if you think back to your childhood, or I encourage any of the listeners to think back to like some of the most memorable, special moments from their childhood, my guess is that almost all of those moments were experiences where they were surrounded by people, when they were doing things with people, oftentimes outside or something different than just the regular mundane day-to-day type stuff, something exciting, something different. Okay, my guess is that those were the memories. There weren't memories about what they were doing on video games or on social media or by reading an online article, which is not all bad, but that's where we're spending so much of our time. So how can we create situations and environments where we're around more people more often? Now I think because that's where the memory, it's where the good memories, those good times are have. That's where we really have that oxytocin that makes us feel so good when we're in the
Yes.
presence of other people. Ultimately, I think Apple and Google and some of the tech companies, they've taken a step in the right direction. I believe that their intentions are good. I hope their intentions are good. Apple with screen time and Google with their well-being app. I think that's a good start. But what we're seeing is only 10% of users are actually using those functionalities on their phone. They're actually starting to track their screen time. So I think that's a step in the right direction. I also think, Pat, back to your statements about how can we start to like get the word out there and like capture attention. I do think that there's some possibilities there for celebrities, whether it be athletes or the Kardashians or what have you, for them to take the lead, right, and to start
Yeah.
talking about it. There's actually, if you search online, you could search influencers that have talked about mental health. People are starting to talk about it more and more. Whether you're Selena Gomez or Julia Roberts, people are starting to talk about it. So my hope is that by more people, more celebrities, more people in the limelight that are talking about it, people will start to seek out more offline experiences. People will log off more and start to look for other types of experiences, which leads me to the last thing is like, let's say, yes, you do realize that this is a big deal. You do realize that it's important for you to get offline, but now what? What do you do when you're offline? Because you grew up spending so much time online. So the next thing that we often do with our retreats and our experiences, and maybe this is a good transition to talking about some of the things, some of your, the things that make you feel alive and enriched, Pat, in acting. But like, what are things that people can do other than be online? That's not an easy question for some kids, especially nowadays. When I sit with kids and I'm like, what else could you be doing besides at 9 o'clock at night inside your house instead of being on video games. Oftentimes at first they struggle, but then it's like there's actually an unlimited amount of things that you can do offline. And so how can
Yes.
we find these new hobbies, activities, whether it be improv or playing guitar or painting or photography or gardening or whatever it may be, that was better for your brain, that allows for better connection with yourself, with others in the world, as opposed to logging on to Fortnite and playing video games for multiple hours. So that was a pretty long response there.
Yeah,
But yeah,
that's absolutely right though, that I think with offline experiences, doing something that's tangible, when it's physical with your body, maybe working with your hands, that brings an immense amount of joy. And there's a lot of research on that as well that shows the positive impacts that it has on the brain. So if we're talking about participating in sports or participating in the arts, those things have a profound impact on our happiness, because not only are you developing a skill set that you are then going to be able to take with you the rest of your life, you're at the same time developing skills that require you to oftentimes interact with people and
totally.
to engage with one another. Now you could be at home practicing guitar by yourself, but then you're able to take that skill and play music with other people, and
Hmm.
that's also a really beautiful thing. And when we're engaging in these sort of social activities, like you said, it releases the oxytocin, but it also exercises our interpersonal skill sets, which I think are only going to become more and more important. I think that as we see more automation, more artificial intelligence taking over a wide variety of very technical type jobs, it's going to be the people who know how to interact with one another, those who have high levels of empathy, those who can really communicate with a wide variety of different types of people. Those are the individuals who are going to excel. And I think at this time, it's important to really hit home the importance of these social skills, the importance of these interpersonal skills, because
Hmm.
they're only going to become more important. And it's through offline live experiences, whether you're playing a sport, playing an instrument, whether you're acting in a play or gardening, like you were saying before. It's these experiences that really bring you joy, because you are creating something, and there's a lot of joy that comes from creation. It's not allowing us to just consume. I think if we do what from these experiences, if it it's much more enjoyable if we then consume something that we created. Like if we make a meal, for example, and then consume it, it tastes, or at least hopefully it tastes good. And I think an element as to why it tastes good is because you put in the work to do it.
Totally.
And so I think that there really needs to be a gravitation towards these offline, live, tangible experiences that are outside of our screens.
Yeah, I agree. And it's interesting, Pat. I do a lot of workshops with kids, and I've gone into a number of schools, and I often do these live polls through Kahoot. And one question that I often ask is on a scale of 1 to 5, highly agree versus highly disagree. 3 is on the fence. I say, how confident are you in your ability to, or sorry, it's what my ability, I feel confident in my ability to have a quality deep conversation. And usually 2/3 of the time, the teens of nowadays say 2/3 of the kids are not confident in their ability to actually have a conversation. And I think that's really that's tough. That's sad, right? That kids are not, they actually don't feel that they could have a conversation.
Yeah.
So if you can't have a conversation, then it's very difficult for you to develop deep levels of empathy for the other person, because you're not able to really cut through the meat and actually get into inside of another person's head and really understand that person. And so when you talked about getting in the workplace, that made me think about this thought where, like, the resume and your experiences may get you a job, but it's your ability to relate to others and build relationships that will allow you to progress and get promoted. And
Yes.
and it's that emotional intelligence that will allow you to skyrocket, um, as opposed to not having that. And it's just so I just think a lot about like how important it is to be able to have a conversation. And if we're not learning these skills as a young kid, these neural pathways begin to shut down and actually atrophy. You could literally see it in an MRI. A kid, his brain is going to look a little different if they're spending 6 to 10 hours a day on a device, as opposed to a kid who is spending time outside with other kids all the time. So the more time that we could have kids learning to converse with others, and to the capacity for boredom and self-expression and imagination, the better their brain will be and the better it will develop through time, and ultimately the better life they will live, and the better the relationships will be that they can form. So yeah, I'm there with you in that it's important to be able to find these experiences where you could deeply connect and create things as opposed to just consume.
Yes, yes. And I think that a lot of times we forget that interpersonal skills are skills, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
I think that developing social skills, how to read body language, how to listen, how to communicate effectively, I think that these are skill sets just as much as coding for a computer, or engineering, or any other highly technical skills. And I think a lot of times it's easy for us to forget that, because interpersonal skill sets are so innately human that for those who practice them on a regular basis, it becomes second nature.
Right.
And for those who don't practice them, because it's an innately human thing, it's hard to see if they even exist, or you just don't think much about them.
Right.
And so, whereas when you get to the root of it, it really is kind of like what you just said. Interpersonal skill sets are really the heart of everything. When you go in for a job, it's going to be your interpersonal skill sets that keep you in that job and that progress you in within that company, as opposed to being really good at a technical skill set. Now, ideally, of course, it would be great if your interpersonal and your technical skills were great, but it's going to be people like to work with people that they like.
Mm-hmm.
And even though I think it's healthy for people to have difference of opinion and to disagree and to engage in that sort of discourse, that's a whole other conversation of being able to have real authentic conversations with people that you disagree with, as opposed to just shunning them away and saying I hate you or something
Yeah.
like that. That's a whole other conversation. But
Mm-hmm.
being able to interact with people in general, whether it's people you agree with, disagree with, people that are completely from different backgrounds, those skill sets are the ones that, at least I believe, are really going to not only get you far in life, not only achieve whatever form of success or whatever success means to you, but at the end of the day, it's going to make you a happier person.
Totally. You're just going to be more confident in your ability to navigate social situations. One of the things that I started to see a lot in my coaching, Pat, was that kids had a very difficult time enacting what I like to call safe conflict, which is where something comes up that bothers you, whether it was someone who said something that insulted you, or maybe you're not getting the playing time you wanted, or there's just some drama within the team. I found that kids will oftentimes either totally disregard it and just push it away and just not address it and allow it to bubble up because they didn't have the ability to navigate and diffuse the situation and address it and express themselves. Either that, or they're going to go home and they're going to text about it and they're going to try and diffuse it that way. Or the worst and the most toxic thing that seems to be happening and seems to be infused in our culture is that they will oftentimes go to mama and dada and have them solve the situation for them, simply because they don't have the confidence and the interpersonal skills that would allow them to diffuse the situation and work through it in a meaningful way. And so these problem solving skills to your point, is one area of interpersonal skills that I've recognized is really is we're not seeing that as much as we used to. And I think it's scary, and you're right, it's a skill that needs to be learned.
Yeah. And to kind of go off of what we were talking about before, I think it's pretty ironic that a lot of times in high schools, uh, specifically in low income areas, that a lot of times arts and sports, they're the first programs to be cut. But I would argue that it's those type of programs that will lead to a high level of success in adulthood,
Totally.
because it's when you are playing football, you're not just playing football. When you are rehearsing a play, you're not just rehearsing a play. There's a lot more skills, and there's a lot more going on there.
Right.
And if there's some way of expressing the importance of that, and really channeling that through the digital age, that's what I'm all about, is is really like figuring out a way to really teach these skill sets in a way that is going to be engaging for the teen, for the kid, and even for adults as well.
Right. And look, no great companies, great fortunes, or anything of real meaning, Pat, has been created by teams, by people, great plays, right? These are by teams. These are by people collaborating and working together. But if we don't know how to do that, and we're not confident in our ability to work together in teams, then the ability to create something meaningful and special and be fulfilled through our creation, it's going to be a lot more difficult. And so a lot of this work that I do is teaching people how to work together in a more meaningful way, whether it be in corporate environments or team environments, but how to collaborate in a way that we could really build something special together. I'm curious, Pat, how do you find, as far as it goes with theater, how would theater or improv improve one's ability or one's skill set as far as collaboration?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So when you are putting up a play, you have a wide variety of different characters. Sometimes if you have a small play, it might be only a couple of characters, but depending on the play that you work with, it's a team of people. And it's not only just the actors, but it's also the director, the playwright, the lighting designer, the sound designer, the set designer. There's a lot of people working in this space, and you're all working towards a common goal of putting up a production that is going to impact an audience. And on a lot of ways, even though the audience is only there for one night and then the next night it's a different audience, that audience also plays a role in putting a production. So, just speaking from my own experience as an actor, although I have worked in the other mediums in some form within the theater industry, when you're performing on stage, you're required to be at least in my experience, I was more present than probably I've ever had to be, because you're not only having to get a good grasp of who you are as a character, but you also have to actively listen to your scene partner. And you have to be aware of what's happening on the set. What kind of set, what kind of playground are you working on? You also have to be aware that the audience can see you, that the audience can hear you. So there are a lot of working elements going on when you're performing in a show. And the moment that you lose focus on, on top of all of that stuff, is that like you're also trying to put on a performance that the audience is going to believe, the
Right.
audience is going to be able to escape into this other world. And if you're not focused, if you're not present, then in a lot of ways, in my opinion, it kind of ruins it for everybody.
Mm,
And so it really forces you to exercise these critical skills that come to really interacting with people and having a high level of self-awareness. And what's always exciting is bringing these sort of practices into the workplace, or working with people who may not be in a theater, and applying it, kind of what I was talking before about the applied theater field. It's applying it to whatever business or activity that the company or organization or whoever you're working with might be working on.
Yeah. I think a lot about traditional learning environments and how they're so antiquated right now, right? I mean, we have oftentimes a teacher just depositing knowledge into kids' brains, and the kids are depositing knowledge onto a scantron. Okay. And we know that this is not the way kids are learning. This setup was how things were set up for like assembly lines in the Industrial Revolution. This is where it got started out. So I think a lot about like experiences and experiential learning as being a great way to teach. And improv and comedy and humor and acting and live action role playing is such a great way to immerse yourself in learning. And so if we could figure out how to maybe, apply theater more to learning, I think it's going to make things a lot more interesting and allow things to stick. So what we do in our offline experiences with teens is we do a lot of thinking on our feet and live action role playing type things, because it's a lot more memorable and a lot more meaningful. They're immersing themselves into an experience where they have to be in a state of flow. They have to think
Yes.
on their feet. They can't be distracted by notifications or allow their mind to wander, because they rely on others are relying on them to give and receive cues. And so this whole idea of immersing yourself in like an experience, whether it's a live action role playing or an improvisational experience, I think it's a really healthy way to teach, and it's just a great thing for your brain as well.
Oh yeah, it's a heightened form of play.
Yeah.
When we think about when we're kids, and my biggest heartbreak is that I feel like probably a lot of kids might be missing out on these experiences. Hopefully, some of them still aren't. But when you're a kid and you're playing, you have no concept of time. You're really lost in what you're doing. You're having fun, and we need more of that in this world right now, because there's so many developmental things that are happening when a child is at play.
Yep.
And there's an element of fun, and that's, I think, a really important concept and idea to run with, is that with offline experiences, like with what you're doing with America Offline, is creating experiences that, yes, the kids are going to learn and grow from it, but they're going to learn and grow because they're engaged, because it's fun, and
Right.
because it's a heightened form of play. And really, and I'm a big believer that we learn while we're playing, and because we're learning while we're playing, we partially don't even realize that we're learning. And so
Right.
it's when we're playing it, it sort of works on us in this subconscious way that, like you said before, we're able to retain the information easier, and then therefore remember it down the line. We're able to remember that experience and remember what we learned from that experience. And that is light years away from what you just mentioned about a teacher lecturing knowledge, and then that knowledge just being translated onto a scantron that the student fills out. And then after that scantron is done, after that test is done, the information is forgotten about.
Yeah. Yeah. It's how can we teach kids how to ask the right questions instead of just always giving them the answers, right?
Yes.
How like all their answers are at their fingertips nowadays. If I want to know who was the president in 1910, I mean, do I really need to memorize that anymore? I could just look it up. So it should be more of like finding meaning and learning to ask why and drawing meaning out of like history, or and finding more purpose there, as opposed to just memorizing facts. Like let's cut through the fat a little bit. Let's get into more of the meaning, and learn how to ask questions. I think that's super important nowadays.
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think to go off your point before, there really needs to be a change in how we educate students. And it's tough because obviously all students learn differently. So we can't necessarily find a system that is going to work for all students. But with that, we definitely need to introduce more diverse ways to teach within the current system and have classes be different, or have classes and the way that they're taught be different in order to encourage that sort of learning process.
Yeah, and it's kind of scary, Pat, because like I've worked with a lot of schools and a lot of principals, and honestly, it's like it's almost like a badge of honor when they say, "Oh my God, like our school is like 1-to-1 iPad to kid," but they're not really realizing that the research is starting to surface, and it's showing that kids actually do not learn better or retain information better with a screen. They don't. They retain information better when when they're going through an experience, when they're having fun, when they're fully engaged. A lot of kids are starting to express problems with their eyes, problems with posture, problems with focus, because they're having to learn on iPads, because they're having to enter all their work through Google Docs or Google Classroom. And so a lot of schools are starting to adopt this 1-to-1 iPad thing. But then at the other end of the spectrum, we're also seeing a lot of schools, particularly here in the San Francisco Bay Area, that are actually moving away from devices in schools. They're actually doing the Yonder pouches where they have to lock their phones up at schools. So I think things are starting to progress in the right way. I would venture to bet that in 10 years we're going to start to see, definitely there's going to be technology in the classroom, but I think we're going to be a lot more mindful about how that technology is being disseminated in the classroom, and it's not going to be a 1-to-1 iPad thing. Imagine a 2-to-1 iPad thing where kids work together on an iPad, so they're actually communicating face to face with someone and working together, as opposed to just being in your little silo one-on-one with an iPad. So I think these are the types of
Right.
advancements that we need to start to look at as far as education goes.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. I really believe that, or at least I hope that there's some sort of change like that that happens in the future. That really, I think it all comes down, to go off your point before, it comes down to being intentional. And we're a lot of us, we haven't been super intentional with the way that we're using technology. And I think if we could get more intentional with regards to how we use technology for ourselves, how we use it within our families, how we use it at our schools, at our jobs, at corporations, also with government too. I think if we could get more intentional about the ways in which we use it, then it could have a really powerful effect on ourselves as individuals, but then
Yeah,
also
yeah.
us as a society.
Totally. I don't know if it was Andrew Dunn with Ciempo, or I forget exactly what it was, but there was some app. I think it might be the Space app, that before you put it on your phone, and before you open any app, it asks you like, what is your intention? And I think it's important for us before we do. And it's not just our app interactions, it's or our technology interactions. It's before we do anything, even before I got on this podcast with you, Pat. It's like, what is our intention? So if we can just learn the skill of just taking a deep breath and slowing down, and before we do anything, whether we're eating a meal, we're giving a presentation, we're having a conversation, what is our intention here before we move forward? I think we're going to be a lot more fulfilled in our work, and we're going to spend our time a lot more wisely. And I think oftentimes technology, it pulls us away from what our intentions are, because it's preying on our just our human nature of like I said, of just wanting to be accepted, wanting to be seen, wanting to be recognized. And that's oftentimes why we are going on to social media and scrolling and posting and checking how many likes and doing things that we are not necessarily intending to do, because they're not really serving us. So if we could just take a deep breath and step back and look at what am I intending to do with this 10 minutes that I'm spending on Instagram? If it's serving you in a way and you have an intention, then great, that's fine. But if it's just entertainment, maybe that's fine too. But if we're spending 30 minutes scrolling, maybe, and we didn't, and it was mindlessly scrolling, and it's taking place of something that we wanted to do, something that would serve us, then that's when things become a little bit problematic.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. And I'm very interested just to see how things will evolve now that there is a conversation happening around digital wellness, around mindful tech use, and about creating tech that is really for the people, as opposed to tech industries trying to, have us follow their agenda and take us off of our own agenda and follow theirs by, you know, really making it very enticing and intoxicating to stay on our smartphones.
I mean, I think there's huge opportunity, Pat, for tech companies, small, big, medium, doesn't matter, to develop ethical technologies, to develop technologies that, what Tristan Harris would consider time well spent. I think those companies that are actually paying attention to the real outcomes, the outcomes that people want, those are the technologies that at the end of the day are going to stay around and they're going to win out. So I'm curious, like you are, as to who is going to be at the forefront of developing these ethical platforms to improve quality of life. I think that the meditation apps, things like that, those are great applications of technologies for good. So I'm very, we'll see what happens here in the upcoming years, but there's certainly a lot of work to be done, but I think we are trending in the right direction.
Yes, absolutely. Well, David, it was very great chatting with you. I know we could probably talk for hours about all this all this stuff.
Probably.
Yeah. I mean,
Definitely.
even before we were recording, we were chatting for a while. But before we stop recording and sign off, I'm wondering if for my listeners from the Ships podcast, I'm wondering if you could just share where our listeners could find out more information about you and America Offline.
Yeah, you can check us out at americaoffline.info. We're also on, ironically, all over social media, trying to spread the word about all of our work. So you just look up America Online, Offline on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. Feel free to reach out to me at david@americaoffline.info. I love hearing from people. We're doing a number of offline retreats throughout the course of 2020 and beyond for young adults in general, and teens, and also doing some speaking engagements and workshops. So I'd love to hear from anybody if this podcast made an impact.
Great. Awesome. Well, and specifically for the Ships podcast, I'll make sure to include all that great stuff within the show notes so our listeners out there can just scroll down and click all those links and shoot you an email as well, hopefully.
Thank you, Pat. And likewise for you. I love what you're doing with the Ships podcast. And I know you're doing some incredible work. Where can people learn a little bit more about the work that you're doing and maybe access some of your content?
Yeah, absolutely. The best place to go would be patmcandrew.com. So on there, you'll be able to find information about the podcast, information about my blog, as well as information about speaking engagements, what my speaking engagements usually entail. And yeah, and there's a contact link on there. So if you're interested in either meeting up with me or having me speak at an event, just feel free to shoot me a message. Like David, like in your case, I always love just hearing from people who are very passionate about these things and are looking to make a change in either their lives or within their communities.
Awesome. Pat, this was fun. Let's keep the conversation going. And all the listeners out there, for the Ships podcast and for America Offline, we thank you for stopping in and checking out the shows.
Yes, thank you, everybody.
Take care. Have a good day.